All righty. Well, we have Kyle Fouts, our managing broker, in for What's
Good
Up,
morning,
Buttercups. So let's jump right into it. One of the things I've been getting a lot of questions, and I thought we'd just spend a few minutes because there's confusions between. We're talking about seller financing right now. There's a difference between wraps and carrybacks and subject tos, and what does West USA permit and allow, and so forth. So, what are the questions that you're getting, or what do you want us to know to help us understand the differences?
If you're listing properties, you're going to see these types of inquiries from investors. They have kind of blanket emails to our previous topics. They'll send out to anybody that's in their buy box, essentially, and they're going to send emails that make it sound very beneficial to both parties. They say they're enticing. They might even include like a letter of intent type thing. Essentially, what they're looking to do is benefit from the current loan that's on the property. So a subject to and a wrap are creative type financing. I don't, when I'm talking to an agent about these types, they'll send us an email and say, hey, I just got this for my listing. I'm not really sure what it is. Can you explain? I don't ever want to go down the road of, that this is an absolute no, because for some people in some situations, it might be a viable option. For us as a brokerage, a wrap is essentially where the existing note is wrapped into a new note, and a subject to is just the investor closes on the home and essentially takes over payments without paying off the existing note. Our brokerage policy on these is that we won't allow our agents to be part of that type of transaction unless the seller also hires an attorney. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of potential legal implications. Not to say that it happens on every single situation, or that the due on sale clause, which is the big one,
that is the big one. So take a minute to explain that, because agents sometimes just don't understand. Well, West USA won't let us do this, or my brokerage won't let us do that. But it's for our protection, because if you're representing a seller and you put together a wrap of some sort or a subject to of some sort, and in order for the buyer to be protected, there has to be something recorded. Correct. And then if there is something recorded and the lender gets wind of it, they could say, hey, okay, that loan's got to be that $450,000 mortgage has got to be satisfied in 30 days. Right. And us as an agent, if the seller hasn't sought legal representation, it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation with Dwayne. And I've had those lately.
That is the big one, is the due on sale. First off, to your point, our goal is never to take any business out of your hands. Our goal is to protect you. We want to protect you. We want to protect the brokerage. So if we have a policy, it's coming from that vein. Obviously, we want you to be successful, but there are things that that you need to walk back from. A due on sale clause is probably one of those things. That's why we have the policy. Essentially, most notes, mortgages, deeds of trust have due on sale language contained in them. And in the event, like to your point, if the lender does become aware that you've sold the property, they have the ability, based on those terms, to say, okay, 30 days, or I don't even know what the time frame is. It could be a week. I don't know. But if you got a $450,000 note out there that the seller, your client, is still liable for, and the bank says, okay, pay up, I mean, who are they going to look at? They look at you and they look at the brokerage, which is why we have the policy that if anyone's going to entertain this, which honestly I haven't seen many people do, but if they're going to, they need to hire an attorney in order to keep them square on, essentially go into it eyes wide open. It's a lot of risk. It's a lot of risk, and it's not something we want our agents counseling by our sellers through. Honestly, it's just it's one of those scenarios where they need to be the source of the source. Let somebody explain the potential legal ramifications, and if the seller is good with it at that point, and they hire the attorney to walk them through the transaction as well, then we can be okay with that. It's just not something we are going to walk them through.
And then what's the difference between a wrap and a carryback?
Good. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of the whole point. That they do get confused. The seller carryback transactions are viable options for many sellers. If there is an existing note on the property, then a seller carryback is likely not going to be an option unless the down payment for the seller carryback pays off the existing note. If your seller owns a property free and clear, it's a different story. They have the option. Essentially, they're just taking the place of a bank at that point. The lender or the investor is saying, hey, I'd like to purchase your property. Here's the terms I'm willing to purchase it. Will you carry that note? for some sellers, that's an option that's enticing to them. They get interest on that note. It may be beneficial for them. They don't need the big payout immediately. So that is general confusion where seller financing versus what is a wrap and what is a subject to. Those are two different, or I guess 3 different things. But seller financing is fine. You can go through that transaction. There's docs on transaction desk for you. And we're happy to chat about that as always.
Yeah, and I would say, and I know you guys and gals get a lot of calls on this, but fair to say that no agent should execute or have one of these types of contracts executed without talking to the brokers.
Please, I wish the only time I've seen one of these run through our system is with an agent who didn't call us. It was just it was through the review process, looking at the contract and going, oh boy, this is not ideal. And then having to try to walk that back, which
was I that agent?
You were not that agent. Nope, that was not you. But yeah, that's a tough conversation for sure. Just when in doubt, call us. That's why we're here.
All right, let's change gears here. Let's talk about whether we're representing our buyer or a seller when it comes down to mental capacity.
Okay.
And what is our responsibility? I mean, we're not doctors.
We are not doctors.
And I don't necessarily know if somebody is suffering, early stages of dementia. But then there are some situations where or you're dealing with a spouse where one party is fine and the other party
clearly is not.
Clearly has no idea who they are half the time, but the spouse wants to sell the house.
Right. It takes that comes in a lot of different varieties, right? You're right. We don't have an obligation to try to medically diagnose any of our clients, but there are indicators, I would say, concerning conversations that you may have in the specific instance. Recently we had an agent who the spouse was the one who brought up the conversation about her spouse that he was in the early stages of dementia, which is a difficult disease, obviously. For the most part, he's there, but not all the time. And that's when we see that or when we hear that as agents, we have to kind of stop and say, because legally, the parties that you're dealing with have to have the mental capacity to understand what they're doing, understand the documentation that they're signing. Our contracts and our transactions are full of documents and legal terms, et cetera. They have to be able to understand and comprehend sufficiently. If you have any question about that, you need to advise the parties to talk to an attorney.
And it's not a complicated fix. I mean,
really not.
In my example, let's just say it was the wife that was completely mentally healthy, and the husband was, having, suffering from dementia.
Sure.
All the wife has to do, and this is we should not get involved in this, but all the wife has to do in going through the legal channels is getting, if they haven't already gotten that power of attorney.
Correct.
Because once she has power of attorney to make decisions for the husband, then as agents we're good to go.
We're fine. Yeah, and that's
And I wouldn't go to LegalZoom.
No, we don't want her drafting her own power of attorney. That could be problematic. But yeah, go talk to an attorney to have. I mean, you're right. There are a few extra hoops to jump through, of course. Not everybody wants to jump through those. I understand that. I know advising to go talk to an attorney is not every agent's favorite conversation. But the reality is, just to make sure everything is as it needs to be, sometimes attorneys need to be involved. And in this scenario, that's what needs to happen, is that she needs to go and get a power of attorney. As soon as she has that, now she can act on his behalf legally. There'll never be a question. That's always the concern for agents and brokerages is, where's the question come from? Where's the issue, the lawsuit? And in a case like this where it's questionable, or it may be questionable as to his mental capacity, that's where the question or the dispute lies. Well, if we can alleviate that through legal documentation, it's just that much better for all of us.
Okay, so then what if I show up at a listing appointment and I've done my due diligence, I checked tax records, I've verified that the person that I'm speaking with is the owner of the property. He is the only owner of the property, and I show up on a listing appointment and it becomes apparent that there is some sort of, mental capacity issues here.
That's a more difficult one when it's a sole party and there's not another person to go to. I think that if you have to question it, there's a reason for that. I don't have a problem with you, especially if the person in front of you is giving the impression of understanding, even though you may have questions. I don't have problems with you going through your presentation like you would with any other seller, having the documentation signed. But then I think you need to try to find the family, someone that knows this person that you can have a candid conversation with. If you don't have the ability to do that, I'm not really sure where to go. We'd probably advise that you pass on the listing in a situation like that. If you had zero ability to find somebody, that you could talk to about that person, because if you have questions, then other people may have questions, and especially when that person is literally the only one you're dealing with. That is a very like kind of exhibit A as to where conflict comes from, because then if that's dad, right, and kids know that he has potential issues, and then he sells his home, who complains? The kid.
I actually have an agent on my team. We actually went through this same scenario where there was a second party, no relation to the owner or whatever, but was completely taking advantage of the seller because it was apparent to my agent that the seller had some serious mental deficiencies.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, he's like, I just got to walk because there was no family. It just,
that's unfortunately that there are people out there that will take advantage of any such situation. It's tough.
All right.
Sure.
Nick, have you ever been on a pub crawl?
One or two, yeah.
One or two. Kyle, have you ever been on a pub crawl?
I've heard of such things. Yeah. Brokers don't do much of that.
Didn't you go to ASU? I'm sure you were.
I didn't. I went to Grand Canyon University, sir.
My bad.
We actually do this when we're showing homes.
Pub crawls?
Yeah, you go show a home, go sit and have a cocktail, talk about the home, then go take a look at another home.
Okay.
Okay.
I love that.
And so forth. But obviously 3 or 4 into it, I'm not in a position to be able to write a contract.
Probably longer driving, I would assume.
Are we Ubering to these
Yeah, 100%.
showings?
100%.
Okay. It's a weird segment we got on here.
Well, so what I was getting, and I've only did it once, and it was the client's idea. But I'm thinking this is a great idea.
Hey, Dwayne, we're good.
But we show it to a listing, or we're working with a buyer, and they want to write an offer, and it's apparent that they are intoxicated, and we know if they're falling over and passing out. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but you also know there's that in between where they're maybe slurring their words or they're acting a little different. They're more jovial or whatever, and you know that the alcohol is affecting them. How much trouble could we get into if we had them sign a right?
Yeah, I think we have to be the adults in the room at that point, and
that's where I struggle, bro. That's my problem.
I get it, but at some point you have to, like, again, if you have questions about that, kind of where they're at that moment. I don't mind if you have them sign something, but I'm probably not submitting it that night. If you called and said, "Hey, here's the deal. My guy was definitely intoxicated. Wanted to go through stuff. He signed a contract. What should I do?" I'd say I'd probably hold off and chat with him tomorrow morning and say, "Okay, let's go through this one more time." Right? I think that's a prudent thing to do. I don't know that there's a playbook for that type of thing.
Maybe send in an addendum, and you're like reviewing the file, and the seller signed an addendum. Yes, I acknowledge when I originally signed the listing agreement, I was intoxicated, and now I'm not, and I'm okay with this.
I'm not sure that we need the official addendum, but maybe just like the rehash of the terms and whatnot. So yeah, that's what Listen, I've been doing this a long time. Haven't had to have that conversation one time, so I think it would be a one-off, but we can help navigate.
All right. We see this one party signing. So we see this a lot of time in divorces, but we also see this where one spouse is in town and the other spouse is somewhere around the world or around the country, and very limited access to emails and so forth. And they want to list the house. They want to do a listing agreement, but whether it's for divorce or because of divorce or location, only one party can sign the listing agreement at that time, and understanding that the sale cannot go through at the end at the close of escrow without both signatures. But if I have one signature from one of the spouses, do I have an enforceable listing?
Technical answer is yes. Enforceable, you do. We, as a brokerage, have a policy that anybody on title sign all documentation, including listing agreements and/or purchase contracts. Of course, we all learn when we're going to real estate school. It takes 1 to list, 2 to sell, and that hasn't changed. But the reality is, you could be wasting your time, wasting potential buyer agents' time looking at a property. If you're in a scenario where it's well, to that example, it's a divorce case. If they're not both on the same page, then you need to really consider whether or not you want that listing at that point. I mean, there are special commissioners that handle these things that have legal rights to act. If you're just a standard agent that's not a special commissioner that's been assigned to the file, I would say have a candid conversation with the person that you're dealing with, and ultimately, it's kind of like, listen, I understand divorce inherently is often contentious. I understand that that's the case here, but we need to be both on the same page. I can't just have you do this, because if we get to contract and now the other party won't sign, it's like, okay, we've wasted everybody's time.
Have you ever seen it? Because I've never seen this. I've never heard of it, but I can guarantee you this has happened.
Right.
You've got a couple. They're ticked at each other. They're getting ready to file for divorce, or they've just filed for divorce, hasn't gone through too much of the legal proceedings, and one spouse has their agent sign a listing, and then the other spouse has their agent sign a listing, and then you have now 2 listings.
Correct.
That's fun.
It turns into a mess. One spouse has their agent who they want to deal with, but of course the other spouse, if the other spouse, you know what I mean? If the wife wants one, the husband definitely doesn't want to work with that person. They want their own, and then it's vice versa. And that's where it's like, if we had an agent in that scenario, it'd be like, okay, we need to step back. We would call the broker for the other side and say, here's the scenario. At the end of the day, the adults need to be adults. The people in the situation need to figure it out. If they need to go to their attorneys and figure it out, that's usually what needs to happen. Like, you guys at some point get on the same page and then come talk to me. We can figure it out.
All right, I want to get into an interesting one. So let's just say I'm the listing agent, and I've got a house that sellers are really can't afford the payment, and if it goes any further, it's going to end up going into default, and eventually, if nothing is remedied, it's going to be foreclosed on. And the house has been listed for 3 or 4 months, bunch of showings, no offerings on the house, and so forth. Then I, as a listing agent, come in, and this is just an example, everybody.
Right.
I, as a listing agent, I come in to save the day and say, you know what, I will negotiate a short sale with the bank, because short sales and defaults are becoming more and more popular right now.
For sure.
What do I do? I mean, can I do that? And what's the brokerage's view on it? And because I could see in this scenario where, man, they could really come after me, because I know things.
Oh, absolutely.
that you would know as a buyer.
That no buyer would know as much as you know, having been the listing agent. That's a loaded situation. We would strongly discourage that ever happening. You know what I mean? Like, in a scenario where the desperation or the potential desperation of the client. You know more than any other prospective buyer would. If you're listing it at a certain number and you're getting plenty of showings but no offers, and then the conversation about short sale comes up, that conversation should be, talk to an attorney and see if that is the appropriate path for you to go. Are you comfortable going that path? Okay, yes, I am. Then why, as the listing agent, wouldn't you list it as a short sale on the open market to see if it garnered interest? Because the argument is obviously you took advantage of a situation potentially to benefit. You're getting this house at pennies on the dollar or for less than market value. that would not be taken lightly, And again, it's a situation not that, and the reality is, even though there is benefit for the agent, a lot of times the agent is performing a function that is mutually beneficial to the owner as well. Like they need out, they want out. But it comes with so much liability that you have to have very heavy disclosures. You would have to cancel the listing. You'd have to kind of essentially push them away. If this is what you want to do, I'm happy to walk down this path with you, but you're going to go talk to an attorney. You're going to talk to any other trusted source that you see fit in order to determine that is what you want to do. I will benefit from this. Like there are just very heavy disclosures that you would have to have in order to mitigate the possible risk down the road. And honestly, if you called and had this conversation, our first answer would be just don't do it. Like put it back. If you have it listed at, X number and then they agree to a short sale, or they decide they want to do a short sale at a significantly lower number, think about all the people, the investors, et cetera, you're still going to have the listing, walk through that with them. Yeah, you're not going to buy the house for yourself, but someone else will likely do it. And if you get to a point where maybe you've listed it on the open market, doesn't happen, and you're still interested in that possibility, then you can explore it. But as like a first option, there's too much liability. The investment is not worth the potential headache down the road, in my humble opinion.
All right, well, the grown-ups over here have been having adult conversations. Want to see if Nick has anything to say?
See, I was waiting for Kyle to do that. I was waiting for Kyle to throw it over to me at some point during the broker conversation. That would have been really funny. No, Kyle's dead on. Everything that he said was accurate. I don't really have much that I need to clarify, but we'll talk offline.
All righty. All right, so let's get into the normal stuff that we're hearing, because we're getting the same questions.
Correct.
But how I see things since the big changes, since we've implemented the seller commission addendum, how we counter and as a listing agent representing a seller, I receive a contract and I receive a SCA. How we counter that has changed, correct?
It has. And you guys have probably all heard me say this already. We've amended this. I just want to, if there's anybody new listening, or if you haven't told your friends, like I always say, please do. At the beginning, we didn't want a commission document out there signed when the number on that document was not accurate. So we advise not signing the original one, replacing it with a new one through the counter process. Obviously got plenty of pushback on that, and I had to go back and forth with a broker last week about this scenario because our agent took our advice and took this path, and even though now we've amended our stance a little bit. So just kind of moral of the story is handle it the same way you would any other addendum to the contract. If you get a seller compensation addendum that comes with your offer, which many offers do, if not most, and it's a number that your seller doesn't want, then just sign it. And then counter line 10 of the seller compensation addendum to be whatever the seller is comfortable with.
In a counter form or a separate form?
In the counter offer.
Okay.
It just treat it as any other term in the contract, as any other addendum that's attached to the contract. Just kind of like everybody said when we first brought up our path originally, which trust me, we went round and round about. But it's a straightforward. We've seen it work now plenty, and so there's kind of no more concern about having a signed compensation document out there that's not accurate. The counter obviously will prevail. This is just kind of in case you didn't know, now you're aware. You can handle it and maybe take a path of least resistance in that.
It makes it easier.
Correct.
Anything with we all have access to now to revise contracts and forms from AAR. Anything in it that changes things dramatically with how we negotiate buyer broker agreements, SCAs, and things like that.
In the purchase contract, you saying?
Or
just any docs?
Yeah.
The biggest changes recently, as of February 1, is the cab going away. Which we've all discussed ad nauseum, but at least we no longer have to discuss it. It's no longer if you have it in your templates, please get rid of it because it's just not a form that's that is out there anymore. It's been removed, and so we don't have to deal with the cab. The other part is the listing agreement. We had the language that we would advise leaving 50 and 51 blank, putting the language onto page 7. Now that language, 1551 only now are a checkbox. There's no place to put a buyer-broker compensation, which just makes it, I mean, it just pushes everybody to the SCA path. Use the seller compensation addendum if that's the way it's going to go, but that's what we've advised kind of from the beginning, and now the listing agreement reflects that. The only other thing I would say, there was a change made to the buyer-broker agreement, just the line above where it talks about compensation, but it says specifically, check only one and fill in the compensation, which must be a fixed amount or rate. So we get questions every time Nick and I do office meetings. We get questions, as brokers will, about what can I put on the buyer-broker agreement to account for this or to do that? Like, can I do this or something else? If I'm doing different types of properties, can I put one or the other? And we've just been preaching, like, it's got to be a figure, and now the language supports that. Must be a fixed amount or rate. Like, that's one singular figure. And negotiate as best you can with the buyers up front, and then go from there. Right? I mean, that's how it
So
needs to be.
still okay if I've got a buyer that is interested in residential, and then also interested in looking at vacant land, and maybe also interested in commercial. What we've been doing in those situations is just because they're so different and
Correct.
so unique, and you
Sure.
can easily make the case and outline the differences between all three of those types of transactions to actually creating multiple buyer-broker agreements, one checking the box for residential, and this is the rate, and one for vacant land, this is the rate, and one for commercial, this is the rate.
Provided that you can adequately detail the functions that you're performing, and so essentially you can qualify the reasons why the compensation amounts are different. As long as you can do that sufficiently, then that path is fine. They are different. We all know that. That's land is not residential, is not commercial. They all have very different processes. So I'm okay with that. But you have to look at it through the lens of what would an attorney scrutinize. And if you have X for residential and Y for land, okay, then what are the different functions that you're performing that would substantiate the rationale behind the different fees?
You just got to be able to, you got to be able to justify it.
Justify, absolutely. And that's, if you can, then that would be okay. I mean, my suggestion has been just to have one period at the end, but if you can adequately do that, then I would be okay with multiple for different functions.
All right, Kyle Fouts, thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks
Appreciate
for
it as
having
always.
me.
Yeah,
Appreciate you being
Nick,
here.
thanks for all your help.
Yeah, I'm here for you, buddy.
All right, buddy. Leave everybody with the quote of the day. Those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by others doing it. Appreciate everybody joining us today. Go out and sell a home.